Hey guys, a little bit of a different video than I usually put out, but I know this is going to help some people, so I wanted to put it on the channel. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to replace a lens on an Insta360 ONE X2. This requires no specialty tools, only a steady hand. In the video, I'll be showing you the results of both attempting to buff out a scratch and replacing the lens altogether, and why lens replacement is by far the better option. It's less time consuming, easier to do, and a lot cheaper than sending your camera off to Insta360 for a replacement, which will take at least 2 weeks and cost $150 per lens. I'll leave a link in the description to the lens I'm using to repair this. At the time of recording, it's about $40. It's not an original equipment replacement for the ONE X2. If I had to take a guess, I would say it's for the original ONE X, as the anti-reflective coating appears to have a different tint. It's more of a bluish tint, and the original ONE X2 is an amber tint. However, this won't affect the color or image quality of your recordings. It might give you slightly more lens flares if you're pointing it into direct sunlight, but for most recording situations, you'll either not notice it or not care. I'd also like to point out that by the nature of 360 cameras, you're eventually going to damage a lens, so having one of these on standby might be a good idea if you use your camera a lot. Disclaimer: although this is an easy repair that's relatively quick to do, you're going to need to be patient and take your time, and I am not responsible for any damage you cause to your equipment. I'm simply showing you the results I got from this relatively easy repair. Some good information for anybody who does attempt this repair is after you do it once and see exactly how fast and easy it is, you'll begin to not worry too much about your camera anymore and be able to get some epic shots, knowing that if you damage the lens, they're actually really easy to replace. And this is good for not just wanting to put your camera in harm's way to get an epic shot, but you'll no longer have to worry about the thought of using a lens protector. On 360 cameras, lens protectors affect the image quality in absolutely horrible ways, as I'm sure you know if you've tried to use one. And one more bit of good news is you won't be required to mangle your camera while doing this, and if done properly, should retain its water resistance when you're done. Starting with the results and important information for buffing the lens. There is no secret magic method here. You can look all over the internet and try all the things you want. If you have a scratched lens, you're going to make some compromises when you try to buff it out. In my situation, it was 2 very light scratches, but unfortunately they made it to the glass, past the reflective coating. Some important information before we get started in buffing out this scratch. 360 camera lenses see every tiny, minute detail and imperfection on the lens. So whereas you might be able to get away with this method with better results on flat lenses, with wide-angle lenses, that's not the case, and it's even more amplified on a 360 camera. You'll see anything that's not perfect, which is why replacing the lens is just a better option in my opinion, but here's what we got. The moment you decide you're going to attempt to buff the lens to remove the scratch or make it less noticeable, because it will always be noticeable no matter how good of a job you do, you need to buff the entire lens, not just the damaged area. There are 2 reasons for this. One, these are precision ground lenses. If you buff just that one area, you will take the lens out of round. Now, there's a good chance that you're not going to keep it perfectly round while doing this, but if you put even buffing pressure on the entire lens, then you'll make any imperfections that are induced by your repair less noticeable. So basically, do not flat spot the lens while trying to repair it. Don't be lazy, buff the entire thing. Second, you need to make sure that you buff off the entire anti-reflective coating. I know that might sound counterintuitive, but when you go to repair this scratch, you're going to be removing the reflective coating from that area anyways. And if you leave it on the rest of the lens, you will notice it in the footage. Trust me, it's better to have some minor reflections and lens flares that are natural than ones that abruptly end at the reflective coating. You can try it if you want and see if the results are okay, but you're most likely going to want to buff the entire lens. To buff out this scratch, I simply used a rotary tool with some buffing pads and some Scratch X. I used a medium speed as to not heat up the glass. I don't really know if that matters, so have at it. This was a long process to get any decent results, and the final results weren't that great anyways, but they were better and worth doing if it's your only option. Altogether, I think I spent between 3 and 4 hours of going over this lens evenly to reduce the effects of the scratch. So as you can see in my situation, the repair was decent enough for me to continue to use this camera for several months, of which I did. But I always attempted to avoid aiming the camera in this exact location. As you can clearly see, it's still very visible. However, it wasn't enough of a nuisance in my situation to justify sending the camera off and spending $150 to be without it for 2 weeks. I use this camera all the time, so I need it. In my videos, I like to make wide sweeping shots that are more dynamic, and I got tired of avoiding this camera angle, so I decided to do another search, where I came across a video from an individual named Liam Harley, and I'd like to give him credit and a big thank you for doing the dirty work so we didn't have to. In his situation, he pried open the entire side cover of his case in an attempt to replace the lens, just to find out you didn't have to do that. As it turns out, the diameter of the lens is perfect to fit into this slot without removing the side of the camera. No discredit to him, I don't blame him at all for attempting this repair in that method because he simply didn't know, neither did I. Nobody really knew as far as I could tell because like most of these companies, they're not going to help you with your own repairs. However, there was one catch that we didn't see in his video because of his specific situation. His entire lens was smashed and pretty much already removed. He simply had to clean up the area for the new lens to fit in. In my situation, I had a perfectly intact lens that was not going to come out on its own. Now I'm certain somebody can figure out a better way to remove one of these lenses without damaging the camera. But I'm not a repair shop. I only have this one camera to work with, and I decided to go ahead and cut off the lens. Well, cut into the lens. You see, the Insta360 has a fisheye lens, and underneath the outer lens is a small pocket of air that shields the inner lens. If you damage this inner lens, you're probably screwed, as I don't know where you could get a replacement for that. If you decide to use my method of cutting into the lens, it is very important that you wear a face mask and eye protection, because this is fine glass dust that you do not want to be breathing in, and you don't want to get it into your eyes. Now, I wear glasses, but I still use these protective lenses because you need to be able to see what you're doing, and you're going to be close to the lens while cutting into it. So you've been warned. Don't think you can get away with just squinting to do this. Wear protection. After carefully examining the replacement lens, I decided to cut in at an angle and see if I could get one of my tools to fit into this bubble and pop off the remaining shards. In short, that's exactly what I did, and it worked out perfectly. I took my time and used a steady hand, very slowly carving into the outer lens until I exposed this gap of air and could fit a pry tool in between it and pop the remaining pieces of the lens out one by one. The first few pieces popped out pretty easy, and the last remaining shards were a little stubborn. I gently persuaded them at different angles until they released. As far as I could tell while removing the old lens, it was only sealed at the very edge of the lens, not the entire supportive structure. I very carefully removed all remaining pieces of glass. I used a duster to get anything that I missed, and some alcohol on the end of a Q-tip to get any glue residue around the edges. Now, I don't know if rubbing alcohol will have any effect on the coating, if there is any, on the inner lens and the inner side of the outer lens. So I might recommend using distilled water instead, not tap water. I had some of these eyeglass cleaning kits around. They have a wet and a dry wipe, so I decided to use this on the inner and inner portion of the outer lens. I took my time while doing this as well, as any tiny specks of dust or lint from the cloth itself that get trapped between these two lenses will just ruin your footage. These need to be as clean as possible. So we're almost done. The next step was to test fit the lens. I wanted to make sure that it was indeed going to not only fit, but to seat perfectly down into the case. If there's a small lip or gouge around the edge of the case, the lens might not set flat and perfect, which could throw off the focus. The good news is that the lens fit in perfectly. and very snug. The bad news is, once I press fitted it in for the test fit, I couldn't figure out how to get it back out. I attempted to use some hot glue, but these lenses are so smooth that it simply wouldn't grab. For now, this is where I'm going to leave the repair. I'm going to try and find some small suction cups so I can try and pop this lens back out and glue it in properly. As it sits at the moment, I believe, but I do not know, that the glue is simply used as an extra security measure to keep the lens in place. Otherwise, it's just held in by friction. But it's held in by friction pretty good. I think, even without the glue, this is still water resistant, but I do not believe that it's waterproof. At this point, I'll leave it up to you. As it is, without the glue in place, I have a perfectly functioning camera with good video quality. However, I would like to say that in my opinion, it is important to still test fit the lens before you glue it down. Put it in, press it down, make sure it's even and flat all around the edges. This is because, as mentioned earlier, if there is a small nick in the edge of the plastic when you were removing the original lens that's not filed down flat, the lens might not sit perfectly flat. And once you apply super glue, it's staying where you put it. So it's simply better to find out before you glue it in place whether or not it sits perfectly. So put the lens in, make sure it's flat and flush, take it out for some test footage and see if the quality is good. At that point, you can look into some small suction cups to remove the lens and glue it back down. Or you can just run it like it is. In my situation, this lens isn't coming out, so that works for me. I'll summarize this footage so you know exactly what you're looking at. I have the Insta360 ONE X2 mounted on a selfie stick. The stick is running through my belt loops. I have the original lens facing forwards and the replacement lens facing backwards. Any footage from behind me is the replacement lens, and the footage in front of me is the original lens. In the 360 editor, I'm using chromatic calibration and optical flow stabilization to blend the stitch line. As far as the image blending between the two lenses for detail, color, contrast, exposure, stabilization, and focus, I can't tell any difference. The only difference I can see between the two lenses is when looking directly at a bright source of light, such as the sun. I noticed that the replacement lens has slightly more lens flare. This could be due to the replacement lens using a different style or quality of anti-reflective coating, or simply that I didn't get every minute speck of debris off of the inner lens or the inner portion of the outer lens. In short, unless you plan on reframing all your shots to look directly at the sun, you shouldn't notice or care about this minor detail. So that's pretty much it for the repair section of this video, but I would like to add a few things about this camera and why I've never reviewed it on the channel, nor have I recommended it to my viewers without additional information first. I will not deny that Insta360 have made a fantastic 360 camera. Its build quality is good, the software is robust and almost never freezes. This is a reliable camera that has yet to let me down. It's allowed me to capture some amazing and creative footage for quite some time. However, there's a couple shady things about this company which would have made me purchase the GoPro 360 camera instead had I known them before I bought the camera. Number one, you can't purchase this camera, pull it out of the box, and use it. It requires you to register it with your phone before it will function. Otherwise, it's an expensive paperweight. Two, it only functions with a certain number of phones. There's a good chance that yours will not work with this camera and you'll never be able to use it. 3. The list of phones that it works with are hidden on their website, requiring you to dig for them so that they'll hope you buy the camera before you realize you can't use it. And 4. When you install the app, it requests some rather suspicious permissions, such as knowing your geographic location and the ability to make and receive phone calls. This is one of those sad situations where they find themselves at the top of quality when it comes to 360 cameras, so they feel like they can get away with whatever they want. So needless to say, when it comes time to upgrade to a better option, I will be avoiding Insta360 like the plague. Purchasing a camera has been and always should be as simple as pulling it out of the box, putting a battery and SD card in it, then using it. And they've gone out of their way to make it as complicated as possible. So there's my rant. I hope this video helps some of you out who find yourself in this situation.